Victoria Park, Brisbane. The indigenous ghosts of Australia are mostly venomous, and carry their young in a pouch. Sadly, these native spirits have been replaced in many places by European settlers. One of these invaders is a floating nun, reported as being around 300 centimeters tall, who resides in a railway underpass in Brisbane's Victoria Park. The most unusual part of this story is not the ghost, but the reaction of the local population. The ghost was first seen in 1903, and again in 1932, but a sighting in 1965 made the biggest impression. After 4 sightings in 10 days, reports of the ghost caught the imagination of locals. Around 5,000 people flocked to the area one night. The crowds were so bad that police had to close a nearby road. At 10 p.m., around 1,500 people were packed into the tunnel, staring at the walls, and waiting for the ghost to appear. Church Hill Tunnel. The collapsed railway tunnel under Church Hill in Richmond, Virginia has the distinction of being haunted, not just by ghosts, but also by a vampire. The tunnel originally opened in 1873 but closed in 1902. It was in the 1920s, with a growth in both the city's population and economy, that the local rail company decided to reopen the 1,200-meter tunnel. It needed to be cleaned and reinforced before it was ready for use. On the afternoon of October 2, 1925, 200 men were working in the tunnel. They stood on flat cars, pulled by a steam locomotive, working on the tunnel's roof. The ceiling above the locomotive collapsed, burying the train in rubble and clay near the western entrance. Steam squirted from the squashed boiler, scalding the train's fireman. He was able to crawl out of the tunnel to the east, but he died of his injuries in the hospital. The train's driver came off even worse. He was found dead after an 8-day rescue operation, buried in the cab. He was badly burnt and a lever was jammed into his chest. Record-keeping was very informal, and most of the workmen were day laborers, but at least one other person was never recovered. The locomotive, and likely a few bodies, are still in the tunnel. It's since been filled with sand, and the entrances blocked with concrete. Those near the tunnel have reported hearing a number of sounds. Voices saying "Get me out," the sound of digging, and even the screech of locomotive wheels have all been reported. The Richmond vampire, a famous resident of a nearby cemetery, is said to have feasted on the dead workers. Rescuers in the days after the collapse found him crouched over a body. Before seeing his bloody fangs, they chased the vampire back to the crypt of a man that had died in 1922. That grave has since been padlocked, and the bodies inside have been removed. It suggests an interesting scenario, though. If the Richmond vampire did indeed feast on the blood of the trapped workers, then perhaps some of them turned. Could the noises people hear perhaps come not from ghosts, but from immortal vampires that have been waiting 90 years for their first drop of blood? Alan doesn't believe in ghosts, but he does find local folklore utterly fascinating. He's also a bit of an armchair urban explorer, so enjoyed researching abandoned tunnels a bit too much. The Screaming Tunnel. The legend of the Screaming Tunnel in Niagara Falls begins with a young girl that met an unfortunate fate. There are a few versions of the story, but each one agrees that she lived in a farmhouse on the south side of the tunnel. One night her house caught fire, and she fled the building with her clothes ablaze. She reaches the tunnel before she fell to the ground, and that is where she perished. Other tales say she was set on fire deliberately by her raging father, or that she was raped and burned in the tunnel to hide evidence. The legend says that if you stand in the center of the tunnel and light a match, the match will go out. You will then hear the screams of the dying girl. The tunnel's a popular destination for ghost hunters, and you can take it in as part of a guided tour, if you wish. YouTube hosts many videos of it, though none of them appear to have captured the actual scream. One video does have coyotes in the background, making high-pitched yelps. of the sort that might well sound like screams with a bit of echo. Sensabaugh Tunnel. If you want a haunted tunnel in North America but don't like Canadians and their maply ways, there are plenty of tunnels in the U.S. Sensabaugh Tunnel is built in Tennessee in the 1920s as part of the road, and was named for the man that owned the land, Edward Sensabaugh. Old Ed features prominently in the legends behind the place. Your opinion on Ed is likely to be very different depending on which version you hear. In the kinder version, Ed let a homeless man into his home as an act of charity. Their guest tried to steal jewelry, so Ed confronted him with a gun. The thief grabbed Ed's baby daughter to use as a shield, and ran out of the house. He got away and drowned the baby in the tunnel. Another version omits the homeless man, and paints Ed Sensabaugh as a madman that killed his entire family, baby included, and threw their bodies into the tunnel. However she died. That baby is said to haunt the tunnel today. Locals say that if you switch off your car engine in the middle of the tunnel, it won't switch back on. You can also hear the baby's cry, and the approaching footsteps of Ed himself. An investigation by the Southern States Paranormal Research Society concluded that ghostly activity is sadly lacking, but they suggest an even more fascinating explanation for the tunnel's reputation. Edward Sensabaugh lived into his old age, not dying until the 1950s. None of his children died as babies. By the time Ed grew old, vandals and hormonal teenagers had taken to using the tunnel for their respective fun. Ed wasn't happy about that fact. If you had your own tunnel, you'd probably not want teenagers ruining it either. Ed's weapon was an unusual talent for mimicking animal cries. He would hide at one end of the tunnel, and fill it with an eerie shriek, scaring off anyone hiding inside. The Blue Ghost Tunnel. No, the tunnel isn't blue. The fandom that supposedly lived there is, and we only know about it thanks to a mistake. A paranormal investigator was trying to find the Screaming Tunnel but got lost. He found himself at the much longer Meriden Tunnel, a rail tunnel in the nearby city of Thorold. There he claimed he saw a strange blue mist. The tunnel's reputation soon surpassed its screamier cousin. The TV show Creepy Canada did a feature on it, prompting thousands of visitors a year. It's a popular choice in lists of Canada's most haunted places, and some have called it the most haunted one of all. The ghosts here are said to belong to two rail engineers that died when the steam locomotives they were operating collided in 1903. One of the men became mangled in the boiler, and died at the scene. When rescuers tried to pull him free, his legs came off. The fireman of the other train fell into the flames, and suffered burns on 90% of his body. He died hours later at a nearby hospital. As an added bonus for hauntitude, when the canal that runs above the tunnel was built, it flooded a nearby cemetery. The tunnel became so popular that authorities were forced to brick it up, and the tunnel may be structurally unsafe. Today, one of the paranormal groups that made it famous recommends avoiding it at night. You're more likely to be threatened by a drunken youth than a dead rail worker.